The candles are blinding from up here. That's the first thing I notice. Not the faces of Frankish lords packed into the nave like cattle in a Roman market. Not the smell of incense thick enough to choke a man. Not the cold that has crept through the stones of this basilica and settled into my knees like a judgment. It's those candles. Hundreds of them. Thousands, perhaps. They turn the darkness of Christmas morning into something that almost resembles heaven. And I think God is a very good decoration. It is a governance where he leaves and his servants to suffer. My hands are steady. I have made certain of that. The crown is heavy in my fingers, heavy than it looks, heavier than anything I have held in 20 years of ecclesiastical life. And the man kneeling before me is heavier still. Not in body, though the body is considerable. Charles of the Franks, Charlemagne, is a large man in every dimension that matters. He fills a room before he opens his mouth. He fills this one now, and it is the largest room in Christendom. He is kneeling. He is kneeling before me. God forgive me for what I'm about to think. It'll never happen again. I look down at the iron gray head, bowed in what the crowd will record as humility, and know, I know the way you know, the cold before the fever breaks, that the humility is a performance, and that everything else is the plan. He knew. He has always known. The protests of surprise he will offer afterward, the theatrical bewilderment. I never would have entered the basilica if I had known what the Pope intended. I had already heard them rehearsed in the architecture of this morning, in the careful placement of his lords, in the timing of the acclamation that is about to come, precise as a military campaign, because that is precisely what it is. He planned this. I'm just the instrument of it. And yet it was his men who pulled me from the street. His men who found me after the nephews of Hadrian, my predecessor, my patron, the man whose shadow I have never fully escaped. After those men set upon me in the Via Sacra like common thieves, they tore at my vestments. They tried, God save us, to blind me, to cut out my tongue, to unmake me as a man who could see or speak or testify. They called me an adulterer. They called me a perjurer. They called me things I will not repeat in these walls on this morning before this altar. And where was God's protection then? It was Frankish. Charlemagne sent his count. Charles sent his escort. Charlemagne rode with me back into the city that had tried to consume me, and sat in judgment over men who had laid hands on a pope, and restored me to a throne that I had been dragged from by my vestments. He saved me. There's no other word that fits. He saved me. And now I must save him. Must give him the one thing he can't take by conquest. The one consecration that separates a king who rules because he is strong from an emperor who rules because heaven willed it. He is very clever. I've always known that. What I did not know, what I understand only now, with the crown above his bowed head, and the words forming in my throat that is that I am clever too. Or I must be. Or everything that comes after this moment will be determined by men like him. And the chair of St. Peter will be a prop in someone else's pageant until the end of time. So, I will crown him. I have no choice, which means I have made my peace with having no choice, which is perhaps the only spiritual discipline that actually matters in this life. I will place this crown on his head, and I will speak the words Carolo Pissimo Augusto Adeo Coronato to Charlemagne, the most Augustus, crowned by God. And the people will shout 3 times the ancient acclamation, and it will be done. The world will be different when I lower my hands than it was when I raised them. But he will spend the rest of his reign answering one question he had not yet considered. Who made you emperor? Not conquest, not lineage, not that army outside the walls, or the terror of the Saxons, or the memory of the Lombards he destroyed. I did. These hands, this crown, this office that men have tried to gouge from my face with their fingers and failed, because you cannot destroy what does not belong to any single man. What belongs, if it belongs to anyone, to the centuries themselves. He kneels before me. Today, Charles of the Franks kneels before Leo of Rome. Remember that. The candles burn, the incense rise, the cold presses in from all sides. Like a patient thing, I lower the crown. Carolo Pissimo Augusto. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Courtney, and welcome to the Time Travelers Club. All right, welcome back, guys. So last time we left off was about the 1st century CE. And now it's time to fast forward almost 800 years. Today we are going to talk about the Holy Roman Empire of it all. And that is a hot, heaping dumpster fire. You thought we were bad. Good Lord, these guys. It is literally a metaphor to overlay complicated and confusing things. Even historians really don't like touching that one. And there's whole fields of study just dedicated to experts who can decipher and pick it all apart. And today, we are going to attempt to give you the SparkNotes version of that. Goddess, help us all. But it is important to understand this for the upcoming witchcraft trials that this whole season is leading up to. How did we go from a culture that celebrated and has specific roles for such women to vilifying them? So we have to get a lay of the land and understand the world that they were functioning in, at least roughly. So the story begins in the wreckage of Rome. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, it left a power vacuum across Europe that no single successor managed to fill for centuries. The Germanic kingdoms that carved up the former Roman West, Visigoths in Iberia, Franks in Gaul, Ostrogoths in Italy, they were powerful, but they were fragmented. It was the Franks who came closest to reassembling something Roman shape. The Frankish king Charlemagne, Charles the Great, had spent decades conquering and Christianizing much of Western and Central Europe. By 800 AD, he controlled modern France, most of Germany, northern Italy, and parts of Spain and the Low Countries. On Christmas Day, 800, Pope Leo III crowned him Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans, in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome.
And that is a story for another day. like the Pope's getting his he's getting like curb stomped. They tried to gouge out his eyes, cut out his tongue because he was, doing their wives. And like the Pope's like, it was a lot. And then he has to run to Charlemagne, and Charlemagne's like maybe set the whole thing up. Who knows? And also he hates that bitch Irene, who's and but like oh, Charlemagne kind of wanted to get together with Irene, and Leo's like, no, I hate that bitch. So there's a lot going on here.
So many
When we
moving
say
parts.
we mean spark notes because man, I could have dove down into that rabbit hole. I wanted to, but we didn't. So it's because it's not to the purview. I hope we get a chance to talk about it someday because drama. But yeah, like it, and Charlemagne's problematic too. He's off killing pagans and everything else, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So whether Charlemagne expected to be crowned, or was genuinely surprised is actually debated. He allegedly said he wouldn't have entered the church that day if he'd known what the Pope had intended.
Yeah, and I would say the lady doth protest too much.
Correct. It's like, oh, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done my ass.
I would have never. And he kept doing it over as he's wearing the crown.
Exactly.
Like he never got it back. And Napoleon pulls this trick too at some point. And it's the same trick Caesar did when we talked about that. Caesar in his red go-go kinky boots saying, no, don't give me the wreath. I don't want to be your daddy. It's the same shit.
It's the same shit, different person.
And
Funny
I
enough,
guarantee,
same fucking country.
And I would say that, look around 2028. Maybe we'll offer a president for life crown or something like that. And the lady doth protest too much.
The lady doth protest too much. Please no. Please no.
No. I would just keep an eye out for it.
No, and you're not wrong, but you're so wrong for that. Oh, God.
Yeah.
So this coronation was enormously consequential. It asserted that the Roman imperial tradition had not died. It had merely transferred. First to Constantinople, where the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire still thrived, and now to the Franks.
Because we can't have a lady in charge. That's crazy. It ended crazy. Because a lady was in charge.
Yeah. That is
Irene's is scary. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying she was cool. I'm just saying she wasn't doing anything worse than any of the other guys around. But like Leo could not stand the fact that it was an empress. Full stop.
Yep.
Now the Empress Regent, not like the Dowager Empress. No, just like Empress. Full stop. I have a labia. I can run things. And he was like, you can't.
He said no. It also established a template. The Pope could crown emperors, which meant the Pope had, in some sense, authority over emperors. This tension would define the next 7 centuries. 700 years of what the fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's all because he really couldn't stand that a lady was in charge. That's what's wild.
That's pathetic. It's so pathetic. You got your testicles in a bunch because a lady is in charge. God.
Yeah, and he uses it. He's like, oh, she's committing genocide, and so's Charlemagne. So's he. They're all doing it. I'm just saying,
exactly.
Like, the lady, I don't know, man. He has panties in a bunch. And meanwhile, he's accusing her of like adultery and all this. And he's literally getting mugged for it. Because, come on,
he can't keep his penis in his pants.
Come on, Kettle. Like, chill out. Ugh.
Charlemagne's empire didn't survive him intact. His 3 grandsons divided it at the Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD into 3 parts. West Francia, roughly modern France. East Francia, roughly modern Germany, and a middle strip running from the Low Countries through Burgundy into Italy. This division was essentially the origin of the France Germany split that would shape European history forever after. Now we shift. The imperial title lapsed and flickered for decades after the Carolingians fragmented. It was revived in earnest by Otto I of East Francia, Otto the Great, who was crowned emperor by Pope John the 12th in 962 AD. This date is traditionally taken as the founding of what would eventually be called the Holy Roman Empire, though that name wasn't used consistently until the 13th century. Now, Otto was a remarkable figure, a king of the Germans who had crushed the Magyar invasions at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, ending decades of devastating raids into Central Europe, and then turned his attention south into Italy. His coronation revived the imperial idea in a more durable form, and the Ottonian dynasty, named after him and his successors, Otto II and Otto III, because we don't do original names, they created the basic institutional DNA for the empire. The Ottonians were deeply invested in the idea of a Christian empire as a sacred political order. Otto III, in particular, was almost messianic in his vision. He wanted to rule from Rome, surrounded by a renovated Roman court, as a universal Christian emperor. He died young, at 21, in 1002, before this dream could take shape. But the dream itself left a mark on imperial ideology.
Yeah, and like a couple of things on a lot of that too. Like, so like the idea of like why do they just keep naming these people the same fucking name? A lot of that is because it's people's lives clearly short, but it kind of creates a sense of stability because the peasants sometimes don't even know that the king changed, right? They just know his name's Otto. So it makes it feel secure and like a continuation. So there is part of the reason why you do that. And then eventually also some of these names, especially if they were a successful king, you want to hearken to that, right? And that's why certain names are avoided. It was interesting choice for Charles, the current king of the United Kingdom, to choose the name Charles. Because Charles doesn't have that name doesn't have a great track record.
Yeah.
The one lost his head as like the first monarch to be like executed. Not like a mob, like literally there was a trial and executed. So a lot of people were kind of like that name's kind of like one of those like, ooh, it's a bad omen name, you know?
And that's what he picked for himself.
And then he kept, well, like, right. Because for him, it's like, oh, well, like, my name's Charles, and I'm, like, a bajillion years old. I'm just going to stick with that. But, like, you'll see, like, a lot of other people, like, for example, like, one, I think it was Edward VII. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the beginning of the 20th century. His name was originally Albert, or Bertie. You know, he was the one with the fun, like, with the sexy time chairs.
Yeah, yes.
But he went with Edward, because Edward's a strong name. You have Edward Ironside. Edward was a conquering name, a strong name. The Georges were also considered like stable, right? If you forget that they were all messy bitches, but they lived a long time, I guess. So that was enough. But like, so there's that going. The other thing too, I don't know. Like, there's this idea of like the philosopher king is kind of becoming a part of the medieval zeitgeist at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So like King Solomon is becoming a big thing, right? Mm-hmm. So they're trying to recreate that as like, I'm the new King Solomon, like, because you can't call yourself Christ, that would be blasphemy, but you can be the next best thing, which is like this King Solomon, right?
Yeah, the
Um,
King Sol. Oh fuck! Like that, I could go off on a tangent on. We're not going to do that. We don't have time.
but that also creates, you're seeing here with Otto, right? And he's only 21, so part of me goes like, I wonder how many ambitions a 21-year-old could possibly have, and how much of this is the medieval monk of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But it is giving this idea that they think that the Magyars, for a lack of experience, these are like the Hungarians and stuff like that. They have a very deep history as well. But they're like not like German. They're
Mm-hmm.
not like quote unquote traditional Europeans at this point. They are part of like migratory groups that came in from like the steppes, right? And had settled and shit like that. So like they're kind of like a Attila the Hun adjacent. It's messy and murky, and it's not my area of expertise. But
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of see this get harkened back to during World War II when they're going after the Slavs, and
Yep.
the Magyars is impure, and it's the German right to take over that area. It harkens back to some of this.
Gross.
So just little fun facts to keep in mind. So the 11th century, bringing it back, brought the empire's first great constitutional crisis. Because yes, there was one. It was the investiture controversy. The question, which sounds technical but was actually volcanic, was this: who has the right to appoint or invest bishops and abbots within the empire? Now,
Ooh.
this mattered enormously because bishops were not just spiritual figures at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's actually a question that Henry has a problem with a few hundred years later as well. Um, bishops, right? They controlled vast land holdings. They commanded their own military forces. They served as key administrative agents in an era before professional bureaucrats. And this isn't just in the Holy Roman Empire, but it's everywhere, right?
Mm.
Um, an emperor who couldn't appoint loyal bishops lost control of the very machinery of governance, which with the Holy Roman Empire we're going to get into it. It's already a clusterfuck. Um,
To say the least.
like if you're thinking about the same time period, right? You have like England and Wales and all that, right? They don't quite have Scotland or anything yet, but they're struggling with it too. France, who's also very fragmented at this point, where they technically have a king, but you have all these like duchies and shit who are supposed to be like loyal to the king, but they don't have to be. Like they're kind of like their own mini kings. Yeah. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because it's part of this tradition. Right. So they're also struggling with it because you essentially have these tiny kingdoms within the tiny kingdoms of your kingdom who aren't even appointed by you, who have their own agendas, and you're told you need to have them on your staff. It would be like the equivalent of today of having a bunch of like, I don't know, House of Representatives seats or something like, or even we'll just say like your cabinet, right? Because that's more
Mm-hmm.
advisory. And we'll say you have to have a few representatives in the House, probably about 10%. You have to have a bunch of your cabinet, right? And you need to have a few of your generals, all appointed to you by Iran. Or like insert other country that's not your own, right?
Yeah, that would definitely present a problem.
It wouldn't even work today because we don't have that spiritual like authority, because like what do they have over us? I mean, we've done similar stuff where we've appointed our stuff through imperialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like our advisors need to be there, they need to be controlling your economy and all this other crap, and if you don't comply, they have the right to overthrow you, and we won't back you anymore, and we'll overthrow your government. We've done that. But that's the
Countless
equivalent.
times.
The Pope's America, guys. um
Congratulations.
yeah. It's a little different because ours is like imperial colonialism. This isn't really colonialism quite 100% that aspect, though there's a lot of pagans that they're colonizing, I guess. But yeah, it's that idea. Imagine your government, but you actually have a portion of your government that you have no control over. You don't even get to appoint those people in the decision making. It's one reason why the
Mm-mm.
French Revolution happened.
Yeah, no, gross.
So,
Do not like.
right. So yeah. So the Holy Roman Emperor, who got his name because of the Pope, isn't a fan of it anymore. Okay. Um. So, but the Reformed papacy of the 11th century, spearheaded by figures like Pope Gregory the Seventh, they're going to lean hard into their authority now. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Leo had kind of propped the door open. This guy is kicking the fucker down, and it's not even closed.
Yeah.
Kicking it right off the hinges. Um, he wants to get all up in your life and government, man. He argued that clerical appointments were spiritual acts that belonged exclusively to Rome. So these advisors belong to Rome. The lands they hold and the laws that they're governing belong to Rome. Also, you should be appealing to the ecclesiastical courts over secular courts. His authority is better than yours. He can take it away. Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard to run a government like that.
Well, here's the thing, and this feeds into my beliefs perfectly. All power is an illusion. And here's the thing about religious power, because it takes religious fervor. They're talking about your afterlife and your soul and your immortality, right? This is where cults get you. And so what happens here on the physical plane doesn't necessarily matter. You're going to appeal more to the illusion of power when it comes to forever, right?
There's also, because like, I don't personally think that a lot of these kings, especially the ones that are pissing the Pope off, are really care about what the Pope actually thinks or even their own souls and shit at that point.
No, because they know
But
it's a game. Realistically, they all know it's a fucking game.
there are real world consequences if he excommunicates you. The
Yes.
real world consequences are those advisors back off and you just lost your entire bureaucracy. Shit grinds to a halt because the guy who's in charge of all of your like economy is taking a leave of absence. Like all these different roles that happen, like the people who, right. And then you've got your poor people who don't necessarily, or very pious people who tend to usually be the same group, who don't understand. And they're just like, oh my God, all of our souls are being condemned because of this asshole. And then they start rioting and get real Bernie and stabby.
Super Bernie and stabby.
You can't, and like the guards are side-eyeing each other like, do we die for the guy who's supposed to be going to hell now? Oh, bro. Like, it gets real messy. There are real world consequences to this because, yes, some people are believing in that and there's to that degree. But just the bureaucracy being ripped out from under you, there's real world consequences when that happens. You start having a recession. You start or you could be invaded because it's apparently open season now.
Because you're no longer protected by God.
Look, you're not safe. It's like when they excommunicate like one guy times a bajillion. So like, yeah, like this, it is a kind of power that's really unprecedented. Again, it would be the equivalent of the United States, who's always backed you, whose government and economy rely on you, all of a sudden just pulling out and leaving you to your enemies. I don't think that's happened though, right? I don't think we've done that.
No,
we haven't
not
done
at
that.
all. Never.
Anyway, we'll get into it, but it does there's a reason the Pope's not running the world anymore, right? It doesn't work long term. So anyway, the confrontation came to a head under Emperor Henry the Fourth. We're gonna call him Henry because there's like, if it was French, I would be like Henri, but I don't know what the German version of it. It might be just Henry, but we're gonna call him Henry. Okay. So Henry the Fourth, Emperor Henry the Fourth, and Pope Gregory the Seventh in 1076. Gregory excommunicated Henry, which was not merely a spiritual sanction. It released Henry's subjects from their oaths of loyalty. Remember, this isn't a country. It's a bunch of rando states, hundreds of them, constantly shifting and shit, who can kind of fight with each other and all sorts of stuff. We're going to get into the machinations in a bit, but just know that like he's kind of like the big dog daddy, but like with 1,000 kids. Okay, and those kids are independent, right? And if you're excommunicated, they all start looking around at each other and going, well, how come I can't be emperor?
Exactly.
Because it's usually when you're excommunicated, your whole family is too, if not your whole country, right?
Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds
So
me of Scientology and getting out of that.
yeah, there's cult mentality. I'm not, don't get it twisted, but like it's on such a massive scale, right? This is why the founding fathers really did want a complete separation of church and state, amongst many other things. This is one reason, because it just mucks up the system, if you will, if nothing else. If we're not giving a damn about anyone's personal rights, if nothing else, for this reason.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the German princes, who had their own reasons to want a weak emperor, threatened to elect someone else if Henry wasn't absolved within a year. So they, pretty nice of them, because they are testing the waters here, right? You would see this happen from time to time. A pope would get real mad and excommunicate, and then they resolved it. I'm sorry, babe, and then got over themselves. So you don't want to. And then if you're on like full revolt, well, now the king's not excommunicated anymore. Whoa, he can kill you for being a traitor now, legally again, and kill your family. So some people go like, all right, let's give this a minute. Let's see if this breakup's for real. All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So Henry made one of the most dramatic gestures in medieval history, because he did not do. He was dramatic. He was a drama queen.
We love that. Drama king.
Drama king. Love him. But anyway, in January of 1077, he crossed the Alps in the winter, which is bananas. Yeah, there's a reason that there's a whole painting with Napoleon, and this is one of the only names written on it. There's like Hannibal, this guy, and then it's Napoleon carving his own name into the mountain. Like, it's in the winter. That's cuckoo bananas.
Yeah, this is before central heat. This is before real climate control. They don't have cars that have heat in them.
And you wouldn't even be able to do that anyway, because you have to go up the damn mountain. Like, not through it, up it.
Exactly.
Like, today this could kill you with modern gear, like, and tents and like crap that can keep you warm on the damn moon. Like, you could still die. It's considered incredible, and you get your name put on Wikipedia for it. Like, and this fucking guy, stood barefoot in the snow outside of a castle. The castle's called Canossa. And this is where Greg was staying, because I guess he winters there. And you would think, okay.
I love that you're just calling him Greg. This is where Greg is.
Good old Henry and Greg. So here we go. He's outside Greg's door. Old Greg. And you're like, oh boy, it's about to go down, right? And what does Henry do? He does penance for 3 days until the Pope lifts the excommunication.
Good Lord.
He caves. Old Greg, as a priest, could not refuse a repentant sinner, because it doesn't look good on him. It is like, at first you're like, oh, he caved. Yes, but it's all the fucking politics of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
because now the ball's in your court, and if you deny me, you look like an asshole, right? And we've seen what happens when people think popes are assholes. They get the shit kicked out of them in the streets. So, um,
We
and
would
Greg's
rather
trying to
you
do this
people
whole,
not believe you're an asshole.
but Greg's trying to do this whole like holier, like the reason he can do this is he is holier than thou, right? So if you have to now practice what you preach, essentially, which is that you're supposed to be above it all,
Mm-hmm.
and like, so going to Canossa became a byword for humiliation, but it was also we'll also give credit that it was a tactical masterstroke by Henry. The crisis dragged on for decades, with competing popes and emperors, civil wars in Germany, armies marching across the Alps in both directions. Like I said, there's plenty of cases where this isn't the first or last time a holy emperor would do this, right? It was
Lord.
finally settled, partially, by the Concordat of Worms or Worms, because it's the city's called Worms, but it's German, so they do the V sound, and I can't do that sound. So Worms. It's in 1122, which divided the investiture of bishops into spiritual, the Pope's domain, and temporal, the Emperor's domain, components. As a compromise, but not a resolution, the underlying tension, of course, never fully disappeared, right?
Good Lord.
So we have solved it by making it more complicated. Huzzah.
Huzzah! Oh,
The 12th and 13th centuries brought the empire to its greatest heights and most catastrophic structural crisis under the, here we go, my German's not great, guys, Hohenstaufen dynasty. I think I did pretty well with that one, actually. So Frederick the First, or Barbarossa, I'm going to call him Barb. So Barb, who ruled, I'm just respectful. It's better he's Freddy. Okay, I just like Barb. So Barb, who ruled from 1155 to 1190, is one of those towering figures of medieval history. So if you're wondering where the Barbarossa comes from, it's from his big red bushy beard. Literally means red beard.
that's hilarious.
So Barb, with his red beard, was charismatic and relentlessly energetic. He fought 6 campaigns in Italy, trying to reassert imperial authority over the wealthy northern Italian city-states. He was repeatedly frustrated by the quote-unquote Lombard League. It was which I will get one day, but there's a lady in charge of it. Love it. We'll get there one day. She's known for being a pretty cool lady. Anyway, this was a coalition of Italian cities backed by the papacy and suffered a crushing defeat at Legnano in 1176. But he was also a brilliant diplomat and politician within Germany, because that's the backhand of it, right? It's not just about your external campaigns. You have to make sure everyone's behaving themselves at home. It's the equivalent of like driving and having kids fighting in the back seat.
Oh,
But except
that's
if these
never fun.
kids fight, it could kill us all. Anyway, so
Yeah.
managing these turbulent German princes with considerable skill until he drowned.
What?
He drowned crossing the river in the Third Crusade. Another story for another day, Courtney. It's great. Richard Lionheart was there. His ex and Richard Lionheart's ex-boyfriend was there, and mad. And then Barb died, and so then like the French king was like, "Peace out." God,
Good Lord.
there was a lot of mad. Anyway, so his grandson. Can you guess the name?
Is it Frederick?
It's Frederick. Frederick II, because we skipped. I'm assuming it's one of those like Louis XIV, Louis XV situations where like the guy lived long enough that his own kid died, and so you have to give it to the grandkid.
Potentially, yes.
So if people are like, wait, what? How come the grandson's the second or whatever? It's because usually the son died. That's why. And I've heard very experienced podcasters say things, and I'm like, no, don't do it. It's a trap. And it's like, yeah, and then like Louis the 14th died, and his son Louis the 15th. I'm like, no, that was his grandkid, and then his grandkid was Louis the 16th. Like there were no sons. If you are a son, you're not going to be king. Um. Anyway, so Frederick II was perhaps the most extraordinary figure the empire ever produced. This guy is pretty intense.
Like good intense or bad intense?
He's fun. Anyway.
That's not a
depends on who you are.
Anyway. That's not an answer.
So he was born in Sicily. So fun facts. Because I don't write them all, but since you asked, his mom was like ancient. Because she was like 40. Okay.
Oh.
God forbid. Right? When she had him. Her like first and only baby. And everyone was so sus that the pregnancy was fake that she decided to give birth in a tent just to prove it, and then carried the baby on her tit out.
Oh,
to
that's
prove
kind
that
of
she had
fucking badass.
She is badass. I think unfortunately she dies not terribly long afterward.
Oh.
But yeah, but then so this guy was raised in the cosmopolitan. Here we go. Norman, Arab, Greek court. Okay.
Oh.
So Sicily. Let's do a little quick run up on Sicily. Okay. Sicily was originally, there was indigenous, like Indo-European, whatever peoples there. Okay. They get replaced by the Greek colonizers, who then get usurped by the Roman Latin colonizers, who then get usurped by the Normans, the Scandinavians, who then usurped by
it keeps
Arabs,
going.
Right? And it just keeps going, and now here we are in the Holy Roman Empire of it all, and the Germans. There's also the French, the Spanish. Everyone gets their hands inside of Sicily at some point in history.
That sounds like a really bad euphemism, and I hate it.
It is. And it's not terribly wrong because they always get fucked. Anyway, so, it's not great. So this guy could speak 6 languages.
Damn.
Yeah, pretty cool. If you kind of had to, at least there's 3 right there. Like you need to know Norman, Arab, and Greek as is, and we're not even touching Latin. Like so.
That he had to know for religious purposes.
Yeah, he was deeply interested in science, philosophy, falconry, but just birds in general. He was a real bird nut. Like he like bird watching a lot.
It sounds like my kind of guy.
And study them and write about them and their behavior. It's pretty neat. He really loved the natural world. He was called Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world, by contemporaries, right? Well, people who liked him. He was also more or less permanent conflict with the papacy.
Oh.
He was excommunicated multiple times.
Glorious.
Once while actually on crusade, because he had put off crusading so long, and the person who excommunicated him was his own former tutor.
Oh.
Yeah. Also, he was really friendly with Arab, like Muslim people. And they didn't like that. He may have also had a harem.
Oh.
Yeah. He may have also killed his own kid. Because his kid was a mouthy bad little bitch. And was trying to get those good. We'll get into it. Anyway. So, and then he conducted so he was going on crusade. He's excommunicated. In theory, he's not supposed to crusade anymore. He's supposed to come back. Decides to just ignore, leave it on unread, and go crusading anyway. And you're like, oh, well, that's unfortunate. Crusade means that people are going to die. It was like a bloodless crusade because it was all diplomacy. And he got most of Jerusalem back through it.
And
And people
he
were
was
pissed.
excommunicated?
Again,
Oh. Somebody's making
yeah,
bad decisions.
this outraged the Pope even more because the point of a crusade is killing these people. If you're not committing genocide, it's not a crusade. I feel like we don't have any real world examples of this, like where maybe we sit down with people who are historically enemies, at least in more modern history, and really sit down and talk to them, allow them to develop certain technologies and stuff like that, when no, we were supposed to go over there and completely wipe them out. Anyway, so that happened. So Frederick made another fateful decision, though, that would permanently shape the empire's character, right? Um, he really liked Sicily. He didn't really give a fuck about Germany and all of those damn principalities. I don't blame him. He's like, that's complicated. I don't want to deal with it.
It's just like, you see that over there? Fuck that.
Not that he was like bad at it. Like, we'll get into it, but yeah. So to secure his Italian ambitions, right? Because he wanted to actually like conquer Italy. Um, he needed peace in Germany, which meant buying the support of the German princes. Yeah. So he did this by granting them extraordinary powers in the Constituto in Favorum Principum in 1232. This essentially surrendered imperial authority over the prince's territories. So if there was any authority that the emperor had over these territories, it's gone now, right?
Oh. That's what? That
Yeah,
just seems
I
so
don't.
dumb.
It kind of was. It's like
Oh.
a short-term solution, right? It's a short-term solution. There was a lot more to it too, because like his cousin at one or whatever, like someone he was related to, had tried to like usurp him a few times before he died. Conveniently, yeah, there was a whole bunch of shit, and he was just tired of it. He's like, "Here, if I pay you guys, will you shut the hell up?" Yeah. So Frederick got his deal because, of course, he did. But
Yeah.
the empire got a structural wound from which it never fully recovered. Power drained steadily from the center to the periphery. After Frederick's death in 1250, the Hohenstaufen line collapsed into chaos. So his
Well,
son,
yes.
Conrad, a hell of a name for a king, right? Conrad. Apparently there were
Yeah.
3 more before this, but anyway.
Oh
So
boy.
Conrad the Fourth died just 4 years later in 1254. Um, and we unfortunately didn't get to have a King Manfred because that would have, or like a Emperor Manfred. I don't know why that just seems like a fun name, but
It is a fun name.
that was his illegitimate son because the harem. uh, so Manfred was killed in 1266, and then his teenage grandson Conradin, because that's a name, was captured and publicly beheaded by Charles of Anjou in Naples in 1268. That's unfortunate.
Oh. Oh. That's not great.
Yeah. So the last of the Hohenstaufen was executed in a marketplace. So the empire then entered what was called the Great Interregnum, which was from 1250 to 1273, a period of roughly 2 decades with no effective emperor or leadership, during which the German princes consolidated their independence and the empire's Italian ambitions effectively ended.
After the interregnum, the empire was reorganized around a different political logic. Rather than a strong central monarchy, it became an increasingly formalized oligarchy of princes orbiting a relatively weak emperor. The key constitutional document was the Golden Bull of 1356, issued by Emperor Charles IV. It formalized the election of emperors by 7 electors: the archbishops of Mainz, Cologne, and Trier, the king of Bohemia, the Count Palatine of the Rhine, and the Duke of Saxony.
I love that every single one of these guys has a different kind of fucking title. You have an archbishop, you have a king, you have a count, and you have a duke.
Oh, no. There's
And
one more. There's one more. And the Margrave of Brandenburg.
hey, Brandon. Anyway,
Brandon, hey!
it's just like, what? But on the other hand, I'm not necessarily mad about it because you know what? All these fuckers have to agree on someone being in charge of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's. Will it work? Tell me, Courtney. Will it work?
Let's see. Does it work? These 7 men had the exclusive right to choose emperors, and the Golden Bull gave them and their territories extensive privileges: primogeniture succession, indivisibility of their lands, near sovereign judicial authority. This settlement was in many ways the empire's mature constitution. It acknowledged that the emperor was not a hereditary monarch in the traditional sense, but an elected office holder, accountable to the princes. It prevented the empire from developing into the kind of centralized nation-state that France and England were becoming. But it also provided a workable framework that kept the empire functioning for another 4.5 centuries. The Habsburgs. I'm sure you know the face. Everyone knows the Habsburgs' face. Oh. They gradually made the elected imperial title quasi-hereditary through a combination of diplomatic skill, strategic marriages, and sheer persistence.
I would argue through corruption. It was like, here's a system where no one can, that we have created so that no one can inherit this title. Habsburgs went, "Hi, my bear," with their bottom jaw. And they're like, we'll just marry all of you, and then you'll be married into us, and we'll continue to marry within it and create a lovely family wreath.
A lovely family wreath of crimson chins. But,
That's rude. My husband calls me the Crimson Chin.
You are not the Crimson Chin. We have seen plenty of paintings of the Habsburgs. That is more the Crimson Chin. You are not the Crimson Chin. Brandon, your chin is just fine. But
I just think of Lord Bottom Tooth every time from like Family Guy. He's like, and it's like dump his drink from above into his bottom jaw.
Oh God. Oh God. But from 1438 onward, a Habsburg held the imperial throne almost without interruption until the empire's end. Though they never quite managed to turn quasi-hereditary into formally hereditary, and each election remained a genuine political negotiation. The 16th century shattered the empire's religious unity and very nearly destroyed it entirely. Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses in 1517 in Wittenberg, within the empire's heartland. The Protestant Reformation spread with extraordinary speed through the German territories, partly because the political fragmentation of the empire made it impossible for Emperor Charles V to suppress it uniformly. A prince who converted to Lutheranism could protect Lutheran practice within his territory, and Charles couldn't coerce every prince simultaneously while also fighting the Ottoman Empire, France, and various Italian powers.
Yeah, and see, this is where like this kind of like talk is important, because I remember being a kid and they give you the Spark Notes of the Spark Notes version of this, right?
Yes.
Where they just mentioned Martin Luther and how he did the Reformation. They're like, oh, well, that's where they're Protestant, and like the other people were mad. And it's like, okay, like how did this rando prince shelter this guy though? Like the king would be mad, wouldn't he be a traitor? Right.
Like,
there's
no, he's a figurehead.
It's like he's not a king either. Like, this is my land, landlord. You have to give me a notice before you just walk in. Like,
exactly.
There's way more. And once you understand, you're like, oh, so these princes are pretty much their own little kings. Got it. Okay.
Correct.
Um, so that's why it was and unlike anywhere else, it was able to take root here.
Yeah.
It would never have worked in France by itself. It would never have worked in England by itself because, and it wouldn't have really worked in Italy because you're too close to the Pope at that point. But like in these German states, it can because you can just jump over the border, which is in your backyard, and they can't touch you there. This is
Yep.
the safe zone. He's touching the tree. You can't tag him. He's in the safe zone. Um,
Exactly.
so
Charles V spent most of his reign trying to hold the empire together against centrifugal forces of every kind. He presided over the Diet of Worms in 1521, where Luther famously refused to recant. He fought the Scamaltic War against a league of Protestant princes in the 1540s, and he ultimately reached the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, which established the principle cuius regio eius religio, whose realm, his religion. Each prince would determine the religion of his territory. It was pragmatic but unstable, and it excluded Calvinism entirely. So they picked on one and they were just like, that? Yeah, fuck
we
that.
can all
Absolutely not.
agree to hate that guy, except that religion would prove to also be popular.
Exactly.
So
The tensions festered for 60 years until they exploded in the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, which began as a religious conflict within Bohemia and escalated into a general European catastrophe. Bohemian Protestant nobles threw two Catholic imperial governors out of a window in Prague.
it wouldn't even be the first time. I,
No.
I don't I don't believe this is the last time this even happens. That's why they make up a whole word for this. They just literally threw a guy out the fucking window.
Yep. The defenestration of Prague. I love that word though. Defenestration.
Mhm. It
It's
makes
so
it sound
nice.
so fancy. Like if you're like, oh, the defenestration of Prague was 1618. You're like, oh, well, that sounds fancy. Like what happened? They threw a guy out the window. You're like, oh, they because apparently just saying that time we threw those guys out of a window in 1618 didn't cut it. So
No, so we had to come up with a word for it. So defenestration, this is your vocabulary word of the day. It means to throw someone out the window
in an official capacity.
in an official capacity. But all three survived. The Catholics claiming angels caught them. The Protestants claiming the dung heap broke their fall.
I mean, a miracle's a miracle.
I mean,
So,
yeah. The Emperor Ferdinand II responded with force, crushed the Bohemian revolt at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, and launched a general Catholic reconquest. The war metastasized. Denmark intervened on the Protestant side, Sweden under the brilliant Gustavus Adolphus.
so yeah, Gustavus Adolphus, dad of Christina of Sweden,
Mhm.
um, famously dressed like a dude, maybe lesbian, messy bitch to the stars. We love her. Um, yeah, said she was born with like a penis that
We'll
she
have
did
to do
not.
an
But
episode on her at one point in time.
yeah, yeah, she's interesting. Not necessarily a good person, um, but like interesting. She hated women a lot,
Mm.
weirdly. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, she probably hated submission. That was probably what it was and what
No,
it
she hated women.
represented.
She thought that women were just like inferior to like the male race.
Oh no, she was one of those.
Hmm.
Oh no.
But she's like, I'm not like other girls. It's like what?
Oh no, she's a pick me. Never mind, I don't want to do an episode on her.
No, she is very interesting. It's complicated. She's messy. She's it's a story worth listening to, if nothing else. I'm not saying make her your hero. I'm just saying she's interesting.
Ugh. So France, Catholic France, intervened on the Protestant side because it feared Habsburg encirclement more than it feared Protestantism. The war consumed Germany for 3 decades. Armies moved across the landscape, plundering to survive. Famine and plague followed the armies. Some regions of Germany lost a third or more of their population. Cities were sacked. The countryside was depopulated. It remains one of the most destructive conflicts in European history relative to the affected population because it's a civil war.
Yeah,
It's
and
a
like,
civil war.
and if we didn't really like spell it out, so the Habsburgs, aka the Holy Roman Emperors, right? They are Catholic hard with a capital C. Okay, that's why they were big mad about their guys getting thrown out of windows. Um, so just it's like, okay, well, why would France? That's why, because it's like, oh, if we ally with the Habsburgs, our rivals, then we'll be surrounded. So we would or the enemy of our enemy is our friend kind of situation. So it's really weird because they're meanwhile killing all of their own Protestants. You know, so it's like
Yeah.
it's cool if you're a Protestant, just don't be one here. Yeah, it's a mess. So just to, it's like, and when we say Germany, we're speaking of the region that is today Germany. Like, right, they're not Germany yet. There's still all these different principalities, and there's like hundreds of them, and all of them have their own allegiances. If you were looking at a map and like you were coloring in, which you would see all these different like islands of different colors, that show like what kind of like religion they are. And sometimes you're surrounded by your enemy, sometimes you're not. It's a mess, right?
To say the least.
So yeah, and what we're also not saying is like with, because we're gonna get into this more next time, the Counter Reformation and the Reformation of it all. But like it's a good excuse at this point for them, the Habsburgs, the emperor, to kind of try and maybe get some power back, right? Like, oh, we have all these heathens and heretics that I can finally kill, right? And the Pope is backing it up. Maybe if I take over enough territories, get rid of enough people, and stuff like that, I can reassert some of that old cool dominance before Freddie Barb got rid of all of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But all good things come to an end, I guess. So terrible.
That's a way to put it.
Damn, no more genocide. So it ended, and like to be fair, both sides did it, and we're going to talk about that with the witches, but no one's good. Okay, there's unfortunately a lot of innocent people on both sides getting killed. You got poor guys getting thrown out of windows who happen to be Catholic. You've got you Huguenots in France being killed for fucking existing. You've got, you know, it's bad all the way around. So yeah. It did end though with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which is a landmark in history of international relations. It recognized the sovereignty of the empire's constituent states in a way that made the empire's political system explicit. So, like, up until this point, there was also that argument, right? Like, that last little treaty was like, okay, well, you have to, essentially, the simplified version of that was you have to be whatever your king is.
Mm-hmm.
So, if your king is a Catholic, you have to be Catholic. If the next king says, I'm a Protestant, everyone has to be a Protestant. And that was supposed to solve everything, by the way.
Of course it was.
So, this treaty, the new one, right? The princes essentially had the rights of sovereign rulers. So, quite the opposite of probably what the emperor wanted. But it also recognized Calvinism, extended the Augsburg settlement, and set the religious map of Germany roughly where it would remain until the 19th century. Westphalia is often described as the birth of the modern state system, the idea that the sovereign state have non-interference rights with their own borders. For the empire itself, it confirmed that it had been true for a long time. This was not a state in a modern sense, it was a constitutional framework for managing an extraordinary diverse collection of territories, cultures, systems of law, and arbitration more than a government. And from there, the empire would begin a slow decay for the next 2 centuries. Like there's a 7 Years' War, there's like the Habsburg of it all, because then they go from not having just big bomb jaws anymore, they go to having swollen heads. It's a whole thing. And eventually the Holy Roman Empire dies, and then it becomes just the Hungarian Austrian Empire, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's a story for another day. Because that's really kind of outside the scope of this season, right? So for today, that's where we will leave it. So what was it really, right? What is this thing? The Holy Roman Empire defies easy categorization, which is part of why it's so fascinating, but also really, really confusing. It was not a nation state. It had no single language, despite what the, Nazis would have told you. There's no single law, no national army, no centralized taxation, because that was a mess. It was like a different tax zone in every neighborhood. Oh my god. It was bad. It was not a federation, though, in the modern sense. It was clearly not a church, though it clearly was deeply entangled within Christianity. It was perhaps a legal and political culture, a shared framework of institutions, the imperial diet, the imperial chamber court, the circles, traditions, and legitimating ideas that allowed an enormously diverse collection of people and territories to sort of coexist, negotiate, and occasionally fight within recognized rules. It was a system for managing plurality rather than imposing uniformity. In that sense, some historians argued it was less of a failed attempt at national statehood than a genuine different kind of polity, one that was not trying to become France or England and should not be judged by those standards. The empire maintained the peace imperfectly, the 30 Years' War being the catastrophic exception, protected the rights of small entities against larger ones through its courts, and provided a constitutional umbrella in which an extraordinary diversity of human life could exist. It's why Luther could even do what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we wouldn't have Protestantism if this system didn't exist.
Correct.
It's also why, like, science was existing, and, like, women could be oppressed in one area but not in another. Like, there's all of this going on. Also a lot less inbreeding in a lot of it. Not like with the Habsburgs.
With the exception of the Habsburgs.
Yeah, I mean, like, there was still inbreeding, don't get me wrong, but, like, people went shopping at the German principalities when they were trying to, like, clean out the genetic pool a little bit, flush it out a little bit.
Let's dilute this.
For a little bit. So Voltaire kind of really mocked this system, right? Like, he had a lot of things to say. That was antiquated and backwards and all that, right? But maybe he was wrong to mock it. It was wholly in its own complicated way. Roman in its self-understanding, if not geographically, and imperial because he makes the comment, essentially, it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And sort of it's true, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's complicated. That's what the Holy Roman Empire is. It's complicated.
That's complicated.
Forever. What it was above all else was itself. It was one of history's most remarkable experience in governance, and one that surprisingly lasted in various forms for nearly a millennium. The Holy Roman Empire, and then it kind of even then continued a little further on, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Roman Empire's government in the 16th and 17th centuries is one of the most intricate political arrangements in history. A layered, overlapping, often contradictory system that somehow managed to function most of the time without anything representing the modern state apparatus. Understanding it requires letting go of the assumption of that government means centralized authority flowing downward from a single sovereign or figurehead. In the empire, power moved in every direction at once, and legitimacy was constantly negotiated rather than simply exercised.
The emperor was the symbolic and legal apex of the entire structure, but his actual power was heavily constrained from the start and grew more constrained as the centuries passed. He was not a king in the French or Spanish sense. He could not legislate unilaterally, tax his subjects directly, or command armies without the consent of the princes. He was, in a phrase historians use, primus inter pares, first among equals. Though in practice, even that formulation flatters the emperor's real leverage in many situations. Every newly elected emperor was required to sign a document called wall capitulation, the electoral capitulation. This was a contract negotiated with the electors before the coronation, in which the emperor-elect promised to observe specific limits on his power, not to make war or peace without princely consent, not to alienate imperial territories, not to introduce foreign troops into the empire without approval, and a growing list of additional restrictions that accumulated with each election. By the 17th century, these capitulations had become elaborate constitutional documents, essentially setting the terms of employment for each new emperor. The princes had learned from bitter experience what an unchecked emperor could do, and they made sure the contract was specific. This very much reminds me of, okay, somebody like a lawyer
Mm-hmm.
understanding the intricacies of dealing with a djinn.
It's one of those things that there are little bits where it's like, huh, this doesn't sound too terribly different in a way than like what our government, the American government, was set up to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have the power to make war or peace without princely consent. Princes being like the people who run the states, right? It's not quite the same because it's not the people, but it's a lot more than a lot of other governments, right? At that, especially during that time,
Mm-hmm.
you can't alienate imperial territories, aka these states, right? You can't just like say, "I no one talked to that one, we're kicking them out." You can't do that. Not to, just because you decide you're done with that person, right? You
Correct.
can't introduce foreign troops, so you can't be like hiring outside troops and bringing them in to oppress your own people, right? Um, you can't, and it goes further than that. Like, you straight up can't bring anyone in. Period. And this was a time period where you did borrow troops from time to time, right? Because no one
Yeah.
had standing armies. Um, and a growing, like, these restrictions were essentially checks on the power, right? It also forces these emperors to kind of be learned themselves. The downside is you are so bogged down as a leader, right? Like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
can I legally do this? Can I legally do that? I can legally do this with 90% of the people, but these five principalities say I can't do it, so I can't do this entirely just because of these five. And you're so busy trying to manage that internal stuff that you can't really do anything else. That's why it can't expand. It's why it can't really conquer.
Yes.
Um, unless they marry in something. That's why, like, Habsburg Spain and Netherlands
Yeah.
of it all. So, but like, it's too much of a bitch to try and get everyone to agree to do anything. So, and that gets worse over time. It's entropy, right? So, I mean, it
Oh,
is
it's
interesting.
absolutely entropy.
It is interesting though, because this, in a lot of ways, is something that we deal with today. A little different, for sure, but it's not like that part's actually weirdly not hard to understand.
No, and here's the thing, like bad actors create bureaucracy down the road because you try to prevent the bad actors from happening. And so you create more bureaucratic hoops that they have to go through. But what that ends up doing is it ends up stagnating, creating entropy, creating this resistance to even attempt to do. It creates
But
stagnation. How
but
are you
at the
going to function and actually make decisions if you have to jump through like a three-ring circus
but
in order just to get one thing done?
on the other hand, it's a fine balance, right? Because if you don't have any bureaucracy and unchecked power, you have an authoritarian government, right? So, like, the
Correct.
Egyptians, very well known for their bureaucracy, right? And it lasted thousands of years on and off, right? It's when that bureaucracy would fall apart that they fell apart, right? But they also had an absolute ruler in many of their situations too, so it was like a weird
Yes.
balance. I'm not saying we should have a god king, but like
No,
they
we're not
also
looking for a God King. We're not looking
they
for a
also
God
had,
King, but
but they also had a
bureaucracy
system where
has
everyone
good
was
or
fed.
bad things.
But they also had a system where everyone was fed.
Correct.
So like where that like was your right. So interesting. But like right, it's like one of those things I in this situation it's like it's not that they're just it's not out of the kindness of their hearts that they're trying to put checks on him. It's for their own benefit that they put checks on him.
Yes, and it should realistically, like in my opinion, it should have been checks going both ways.
Correct. That wasn't the case.
But
So
no,
there
that
you
wasn't the
are.
case. He was a leashed dog, in
By the end,
essence.
yeah.
Mhm.
So
The emperor's real power base was, therefore, not the imperial office itself, but his hereditary lands. The Habsburg domains of Austria, Bohemia, and after 1526, Hungary. These territories he governed as their hereditary ruler, not as the emperor. And they provided the financial resources, military manpower, and administrative infrastructure that gave Habsburg emperors their actual leverage. When Charles V or Ferdinand II projected imperial power, they were drawing largely on Habsburg resources, not some imperial treasury that didn't really exist. The imperial title still carried immense prestige, however. The emperor was the supreme feudal lord of the empire. All of the princes held their territories in some theoretical sense as imperial fiefs. He was the formal source of all titles, privileges, and legal rights within the empire. He could ennoble people, grant trading privileges, charter universities, legitimize bastards, and issue imperial mandates on a wide range of matters. The imperial court at Vienna was a magnet for petitioners seeking favors, dispensations, and legal remedies that only the emperor could provide. This patronage network was a real form of power, even if it differed fundamentally from the coercive power of a centralized monarchy. Now let's talk about the electors. The 7 electors expanded to 8 in 1648 when the Palatinate electorate was split, and to 9 in 1692 when Hanover was added. They were the empire's constitutional kingmakers. Their role went beyond simply choosing emperors. They were the empire's most powerful princes, and their collective consent was required for the most significant imperial acts.
just another like weird, just to make it even more messy and complicated, right? Was the Royal House of Hanover in England? Well, in the United Kingdom, the British Empire by that point, right? So that would be all those Georges. So the George that we had that the Americans had their revolution against, all that, right? He
Yeah.
was also a Prince of Hanover. Um, so
How the fuck?
weirdly enough, he was also, in that sense, a part of the Holy Roman Empire.
That's so
Uh,
odd.
yeah. So I don't know how all that works. I don't know if it really even had influence and what the Holy Roman Empire was doing. But it would make sense that it does cause the Habsburgs and stuff to like ally themselves quite often with England because of this. Um, because like again, if they piss over Hanover, they're pissing off England and vice versa. So like, it's interesting. Um, there's a lot of bleed here, and it's even bleeding into England. So there you go.
Good lord. Each electorate was a self contained political world. The ecclesiastical electors, the archbishops of Mainz, Cologne, and Trier, were simultaneously spiritual and temporal rulers of substantial territories. The Archbishop of Mainz held a particularly important position as the Arch-Chancellor of the Empire for Germany. which made him the presiding officer of the imperial diet and gave him a central role in imperial administration. So, imperial diet, I do need that explained because diet, when most people think of the word diet, they think of what we're eating. That is not what this is at all.
So, what is a diet? Well, we're going to get into it. We'll get into it. It's complicated.
Fantastic. These prince bishops governed their territories with full secular authority, raising taxes, maintaining courts, commanding armies, while also exercising their spiritual jurisdiction over their dioceses. The secular electors, Bohemia, the Palatinate, Saxony, and Brandenburg, were the great territorial powers of the empire. The Elector of Saxony controlled the wealthiest mining region in northern Europe. The silver mines of the Erzgebirge funded Wettin ambitions for generations. The Elector of Brandenburg was building the administrative and military machine that would eventually become Prussia. The Elector Palatine controlled the strategically vital Middle Rhine and was, in the 16th century, the leader of German Calvinism. These princes were not merely subordinates of the emperor. They negotiated with him as near equals, coordinated among themselves, and collectively could frustrate imperial policy at almost every turn. The Reformation made this even more fraught, since the religious allegiances of the electors determined the confessional balance of power at the highest level of the imperial constitution.
Yeah, and so like this like prince bishop versus like prince, right? Just like not 100% accurate, but close enough. If in the later stories you hear a prince bishop, probably Catholic. If you hear a prince, period, probably Protestant. So you were asking what an imperial diet is, like what a diet is, right? You're right. It's not just some fad where you're losing weight. So the Reichstag, or the imperial diet, was the closest thing the empire had to a central legislature. Though calling it legislature risks overstating its coherence, right? It was an assembly of the empire's constituent members, meeting when summoned by the emperor to discuss and decide on matters of common concern, such as taxation, war, peace, imperial law, and the resolution of major disputes or any reforms. By the 16th century, the Diet had settled into a three-college structure. The first was the College of Electors. It consisted of those 7, later 8, and then 9 electors who deliberately separated and voted as a college. Their decisions carried the most weight, and they often met privately to coordinate positions before the full Diet session. Which, that doesn't seem like problematic at all. Then you have the College of Princes. This one was, of course, far more populous because it didn't include just 9 dudes. And by the 17th century, it had contained over 100 members.
Good Lord.
Yeah. It's right. So you've got 9 guys versus like over 100. And they're, I guess, at best, their decisions matter equally. Yeah. So, this includes those secular princes I was talking about, the ecclesiastical princes, so prince bishops and prince abbots, and the representatives of the imperial counts and imperial knights who had seats on the Diet. The sheer size and diversity of this college made it unwieldy, and confessional divisions, so Catholic versus Protestant, often paralyzed it. This doesn't seem like something we would be familiar with at all.
No.
So, yeah. The college voted by territory and for greater princes and by curial vote for the lesser members grouped into associations, which created endless procedural disputes. So, like, they can't even, like, again, tell me to stop when this sounds familiar. Like, they can't even, they're filibustering. Oh, my God. Anyway. So, finally, there's the third. There's the third group, and this is the College of Imperial Cities. These represent the quote unquote free imperial cities, those cities that answer directly to the emperor rather than any territorial prince. Cities like Frankfurt, Augsburg, Nuremberg, and Hamburg had seats in this college. Their political weight was considerably less than the other two colleges. A decision of the two princely colleges could override them in many circumstances, and they were often excluded from discussions of military matters on the grounds that they couldn't contribute troops in the same way princes could. Because in theory, no one's running them. Um, because again, like all these prince and prince bishops and stuff are like also generals, so whatever. Needless to say, they had a voice, and the free cities were among the empire's most economically dynamic entities. Diet proceedings were extraordinarily slow, even by modern standards. I say even by modern standards because, but even they the original quote was like by modern standards, and I'd be like, we're running into some of those problems now too. But even by modern standards, it was slow. Sessions could last months or even years. Every major item required negotiation across colleges, across confessional lines, and across interests of enormously varied members. Again, tell me to stop when this sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm.
The confessional split introduced by the Reformation made this worse. Because at least they were all one religion before. And I'm not saying that everyone should be all one religion, but when religion mattered in how you governed, when you don't have that separation, of course it made it messy, right? So, yeah, because like I won't even talk to them because they're a goddamn Protestant, and then that Protestant won't talk to that other Protestant because they're a different kind of Protestant. Dear Lord. And then that was like they already had issues with like blood feuds and stuff. Like, I just don't like that guy's face because we've always hated their family. Like, oh my God. So, the confessional split introduced by the Reformation made this worse. Sorry. So, since by the early 17th century, Protestant Catholic members had developed the habit of resolving religious questions not by majority vote, but by negotiation between the two blocks, a procedure called itio in partes, going into parties, formally recognized at Westphalia in 1648. This effectively gave each confessional bloc a veto on the religious matters and slowed the Diet even further. Essentially, like, again, it's going to be real hard for you guys to like really imagine this, but it's almost like no matter if you're a part of a certain party, and then the opposite party just negates you just because they have to always be the opposite of you. And then like anything you try to bring up, they negate and they veto down because they just for the sake of this being against you.
We would never do that nowadays. I'm so glad that we've gotten past that kind of pettiness.
Like they're not going to talk about it. Yeah. And then, of course, it gunks it all up, and then progress grinds to a halt, which is why Voltaire can make fun of it, even though his own country has its own issues. But anyway, after 1663, the Diet ceased to meet in periodic sessions because they were just kind of like rando, and they were just all over the place. Like, there wasn't even like a permanent place for these diets to be held. It was just like the Olympics, man. They were voting on a city, which I can only imagine when we just discussed how they can never agree on anything, that even that would slow it down further, like, because they probably couldn't even agree on which city they all need to meet up in.
Oh, guaranteed. Oh, I don't want to go to your Protestant city. That sounds so dirty.
And it's like, right, oh, but like I refuse to go over there because, my family has beef with that one. And like, no, like we haven't had a chance to host it. What the hell, guys? It's our time. It's our turn. So that someone, somehow, by the grace of whatever, they decided that there needed to be a permanent Congress. And it was going to sit at Regensburg with permanent ambassadors representing each member. Okay. So, like, it's not even just these guys. Like, you have to have, like, representatives. Right? So there's, I guess, no blood. Hell no. Maybe it made it better. Probably not. So it, but it did transform it from a deliberative assembly into something more like a standing diplomatic conference, useful for slow-moving negotiations and capable of decisive action. Because again, they have to go, well, I have to run this by my boss. It's kind of like the UN. Like,
Yeah,
I know it reminds
that's
me
what I was
of.
thinking.
Like the UN can't make any decisions either.
No,
Like, hmm.
nope, not at all. Perhaps the most underappreciated institution in the empire's government was its court system, which was in many ways the most effective mechanism for maintaining order and mediating conflict among the empire's extraordinarily diverse members. The Reichskammergericht, the Imperial Chamber Court, was established in 1495 as part of the imperial reform program of Maximilian I. It was a permanent court with jurisdiction over disputes between imperial estates, princes, cities, and other members of the Diet, and appeals from territorial courts in certain categories of cases. It sat first at Frankfurt and later permanently at Speyer, and after 1689 at Wetzlar. Its judges were appointed jointly by the emperor and the estates, giving it a degree of independence from both. The Chamber Court was chronically understaffed and overwhelmed with cases. Litigation could drag on for generations. The court's backlog of unresolved cases became legendary, and by the 18th century, cases from the 30 Years' War era were still pending. Yet, despite its dysfunction, it served a crucial function. It gave the empire's members a non-violent mechanism of resolving disputes, and the mere existence of a legal remedy discouraged many conflicts from escalating into war. The princes and cities used it constantly, filing suits over territorial boundaries, inheritance rights, jurisdictional disputes, and violations of imperial law. The Reichshofrat, the Imperial Aulic Council, was the emperor's own court, operating from Vienna and applying imperial law with somewhat more flexibility and speed than the Chamber Court. The Aulic Council handled cases reserved to the emperor, matters touching imperial prerogatives, criminal cases against princes, and feudal disputes. And it also served as a court of appeal. Because it operated under the emperor's direct authority, it was somewhat more responsive to Habsburg interests, but it was also faster and often more effective than the Chamber Court, which made it popular with litigants. Together, these courts created something genuinely remarkable, a legal framework with which even the most powerful princes could be, in theory, held accountable to imperial law. The enforcement of court decisions was always the weak point. The empire had no standing army to compel compliance, but the reputational and political costs of openly defying an imperial court ruling were real, and most parties preferred negotiated compliance to outright defiance. The imperial circles, Reichskreis, were a regional administrative structure established in the early 16th century as part of the same reform impulse that created the Chamber Court. The empire was divided into 10 circles. The imperial territories of the Habsburgs and the electors had a more ambiguous relationship with the circle structure, each grouping a set of territories for purposes of military recruitment, taxation, and the maintenance of public peace. Each circle had its own assembly, Kreistag, which met to coordinate these functions among the circle's members. The circles raised the imperial army contingents, collected the imperial taxes, and tried to enforce the peace within their regions. The circles varied enormously in effectiveness. The Swabian Circle and the Franconian Circle in southern Germany were relatively well organized, with strong traditions of cooperating among their members. The Lower Saxon Circle and the Upper Saxon Circle in the north were more politically fraught, especially after the Reformation divided their members among confessional lines. Some circles barely functioned as administrative units at all. The circle system is interesting because it represented a genuine attempt to build a tier of regional government between the central imperial institutions and the individual territories, an intermediate level that could handle practical matters too small for the Diet but too large for any single territory. Its success was partial, but in the regions where it worked, it provided real administrative capacity.
So, for the vast majority of people living in the empire, actual governance came not from any imperial institution, but their territorial ruler, so duke, count, prince bishop, or city council, who governed this territory they lived in. The empire's political diversity was staggering. By the 17th century, it contained perhaps 300 distinct political entities, ranging from major powers like the Electoral Saxony, the Duchy of Moravia, with hundreds of thousands of subjects and substantial military forces, to tiny imperial knights' estates, comprised a few villages and a manor house. So earlier when we were talking about like how like you would have those imperial knights and they also got to be on the diet, this was like the equivalent of some rich guy who owned like the size something like a town and a house.
Mm-hmm.
And he has the same legal say as like all of like something the size of Texas. Like kind of wild. Um So each territory had developed its own governmental institutions over the preceding centuries. Had some form of estates, representative assemblies of nobility, clergy, and towns within the territory that the ruler negotiated with over taxation and law. The power of these territorial estates varied enormously. In some territories, like Austrian lands, the Habsburgs had largely subordinated them by the early 17th century. In others, like Württemberg and many ecclesiastical territories, the estates retained substantial power to check the ruler. Territorial governance ranged from relatively sophisticated bureaucratic administration in the larger territories to essentially personal rule in the smallest ones. The major German principalities had developed chancelleries, treasury offices, and judicial councils by the 16th century. Proto-bureaucracies staffed by legally trained officials, often products of the German universities that had multiplied since the 15th century. The reception of Roman law through these university-trained jurists was transforming the territorial administration, providing more systematic legal frameworks and more professional administrative practices. The free imperial cities were a special case. These were urban republics, governed by city councils, Rat, that in most cases were dominated by patrician families. So like again, republic, guys, not like a democracy. And it's like a big oligarchy with guild representation varying by city. Cities like Nuremberg, Augsburg, Frankfurt, and Hamburg were among the most sophisticated administrative entities in the empire, maintaining complex financial systems, professional legal staffs, and elaborate regulatory regimes governing trade, crafts, public order, and religious life. Augsburg's role as the financial capital of the empire, home to the Fugger and Welser banking dynasties, made it a node of European-wide economic power as well as self-governing city-state. So the Reformation fundamentally reshaped territorial governance by the 16th century. After the Peace of Augsburg established Curius Regio, Eius Religio, territorial rulers became responsible for the religious life of their subjects in a new and direct way. Lutheran and, after 1555 in practice, after 1648 formally, Calvinist princes assumed control over church organization within their territories, appointing ministers, supervising doctrine, managing church property, exercising and disciplinary functions that had previously belonged to Catholic bishops. This territorial church system bound ecclesiastical and civil administration together in Protestant territories. The Elector of Saxony, for example, became effectively the supreme governor of the Lutheran Church in his land. So, like, when you guys kind of think Kind of like the Anglican Church, like the monarch is the head of the church. This is like a little mini version of that.
Hmm.
So, church courts, church property, and clerical appointments all flowed through territorial government. This gave Protestant princes an enormous resource, the church's wealth and moral authority, while also burdening them with administration of religious life in a way that Catholic princes, who still operated within and often in tension with the existing episcopal hierarchy, did not face in quite the same way. The ecclesiastical territories themselves, the prince bishoprics, the archbishoprics, and imperial abbeys, were an extraordinary anomaly. Territories governed by churchmen who were simultaneously spiritual and temporal rulers, elected by cathedral chapters rather than hereditary dynasties, and subject to both papal authority in spiritual matters and imperial authority in temporal matters. The confessional struggle of the late 16th and early 17th centuries made these territories flashpoints, since the question of whether a Lutheran or a Catholic bishop controlled the wealthy episcopal see had an immediate political and military consequences, and it'll become real important for those witch trials.
Yes, it will be.
What is remarkable about this system is that not that it was inefficient. It was spectacularly inefficient, though, by any modern standard. It was remarkable that it worked at all, and that it provided a framework for political life across an enormously diverse territory for just so long. The empire's government was essentially a system of negotiation rather than a system of command. Every significant act required the building of coalitions, the trading of concessions, and the navigation of competing interests imperial, confessional, territorial, and dynastic. It could not act quickly or decisively. It could not raise armies or taxes without protracted argument. It could not compel powerful princes to do anything they were determined not to do. But it could arbitrate. It could make legal remedies that prevented many disputes from becoming wars. It could maintain a framework of shared norms and institutions within the empire's hundreds of political actors where they could all coexist. And in the 16th and 17th centuries, the centuries of the Reformation and the wars of religion, when confessional passions threatened to tear European civilization apart, a framework for coexistence, however creaky and inefficient, was an achievement of the First Order. The 30 Years' War was the system's greatest failure, the moment when the framework broke down entirely, and the empire became a theater of general European destruction. But the Peace of Westphalia that ended it was also, in a sense, the system's vindication. The empire's, the empire's political culture, with its habits of negotiation, compromise, and legal reasoning, produced settlement that ended that war and provided the framework for the next century and a half in European international relations.
What the Holy Roman Empire bequeathed to the witch trials, then, was not simply a set of bad ideas, but a set of structural conditions in which bad ideas could metastasize without check. The empire had begun as Charlemagne's audacious attempt to resurrect Roman authority under a Christian crown, a unified Christian civilization with the emperor as its sword and the pope as its soul. Over centuries, that vision curdled into something far more complicated. A sprawling, jurisdictionally fractured patchwork of princes, bishops, and free cities that could never quite agree on who held final authority over anything. Fragmented power meant no one could stop a determined magistrate. Confessional competition, once Luther shattered the religious consensus, meant every community was under pressure to prove its godliness by rooting out the ungodly. Centuries of church-empire collaboration had filled the legal and theological toolbox with everything needed to construct a conspiracy of Satan worshippers out of the anxieties of a village. And when the empire finally began to crack under the weight of the Reformation and the 30 Years' War, it did not shed those tools. It simply distributed them more widely, to more frightened hands, in more desperate times. The witch trials were not a medieval superstition that the early modern world had failed to outgrow. They were something the early modern world produced out of its own upheaval, with the empire's long shadow falling over every burning.
Way to keep it light, Courtney.
I know I'm terrible, aren't I?
If you like what you if you like what you heard today, please give us a positive review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. It goes a long way for us to appease the algorithm gods and get this suggested to others just like you. The more we can connect to our fellow history nerds, the more we can build up a community and keep this show going.
Also, we have a Patreon where you can hang out with us and get exclusive content, like videos where we might try to make some ancient recipes, talk about topics that couldn't fit into the main arcs of the podcast, and just generally being batshit and dumpster fires, all for the price of a latte per month. Research materials and books cost a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to create the show, so anything that you can provide would be a huge help.
We can't wait to see you guys again next week, and as always, thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Bye, guys.